Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us today, we welcome you in. In our Things That Go Bump in the Night series, something that's been troubling me for a long time now has been this idea of Atlantis or lost island, lost continent, whatever you have, because it repeats very often in human history. The original Atlantis tale comes to us from the ancient Greeks, who claim they got it from the ancient Egyptians. It was about a powerful continent that once waged war upon the entire world, but the Greeks managed to defeat them, which is supposedly what the Egyptians told them. And even though the continent was supposedly destroyed in a storm, it was still believed that it was possible to reach it. Now, from the Greeks to the Romans Empire falls about in the 400s. And in the year 512, St. Brendan gets on board a ship with his fellow monks and some crewmates and goes out and discovers an island called St. Brendan's Island. Now, we know about this because he managed to come back, and he said it was difficult sailing because the island was hidden by mists. St. Brendan might be thought of as the first major explorer from Europe. There is some evidence that the Egyptians and the Romans may have reached North America, as well as the Phoenicians, but we only know about St. Brendan. And we know that the Atlantic Ocean, if the volcano is erupting just right, can generate islands. And St. Brendan's Island was so well known that Christopher Columbus's map included it when he thought he was going across the ocean to India. He actually thought he would have to avoid St. Brendan's Island, which is why he charted his course the way he did. But Christopher Columbus, 1492, that's not the next time, because we have the Vikings. The Vikings sailed across as if they knew there was something there. I mean, the Vikings were tough and, bold explorers and warriors and trading people and farmers. But it takes a lot of guts to point your ship into the middle of the ocean and sail on a hope and a prayer. How the Polynesians and the Melanesians and all those oceanic people did it, I have no idea. That I've read a little bit about it, and that the theories are still out. They do not know how people could point their canoes and travel across the ocean. That's anytime you look at a Hawaiian or a Filipino or anybody like that their ancestors were brave indeed. It's nothing but respect. They would load up their entire possessions into a little canoe, maybe a couple pigs, maybe a couple chickens, and set sail. And they would find land. Well, the Europeans were into this too, like I said. St. Brendan 500, and the Vikings sometime between the 10th and 11th century. Maybe into the 9th they were doing it. But they found Iceland, suspiciously, when the Vikings found Iceland, it had already been populated by monks. And, Vikings being Vikings, they dealt with the monks fairly easily. But that shows that monks, Christian faithful priests, were in the exploration business in the 5th to 6th and 7th centuries. Why would the church be sending people away? Well, it was something of a virtue to find a place of perfect isolation. And what's more isolated than an island in the middle of the water? Now, people have claimed to see St. Brendan's Island, but it's always shrouded in mist. It's very difficult to find and land, etc. The Vikings don't say that about Iceland, they don't say that about Greenland, and they don't say that about Vinland or Canada as it might be better known today. The Vikings were able to chart quite regular courses. And they knew what they were doing. It's just because they lived in the past doesn't mean they were dummies. As a matter of fact, they had to be better innovators than we do today. We've got GPS technology. We can have the boat pretty much steer itself to wherever we want it to go. But they had to just say, okay, take a bearing by the stars at this time of night, set my course then, and that's where we're going for the next 24 hours. Incredible stuff. Then after the Vikings, and the Vikings cover a long period of history, the Vikings disappear out of Greenland in about the 1400s, but around 1152, Prince Matic of Wales, he was pissed off at all the conflict in the Kingdom of Wales. He basically got his followers on a boat and then set sail and never to return again. Now, Prince Matic was not an idiot. His historical veracity is doubted because he's not attested to, but I mean, he wouldn't have had an impact on the historical record after he decided to set sail. A father grieving for his son would probably not want to include that episode in his annals. So, yeah, it makes sense why he hasn't been made a big deal of, but the tale is still told to this very day. Enough that we know the date, 1152. We don't know exactly what happened to Prince Matic, but it's a reasonable assumption to assume he had talked to some Vikings. Not only were they around at the same time, but at that point, the Vikings were still in Iceland and Greenland, and there is some evidence they were still visiting Vinland. So Prince Matic would have known that there was a gigantic continent out there to be explored. He didn't come back because he didn't want to come back. He was avoiding conflict. And whether his ship sank or whether he actually found somewhere, he found somewhere where that conflict was far, far away. Good for him. Where this becomes interesting is during the first century or so of exploring North and South America, there's rumors about tribes that spoke Gaelic or Welsh, or they had blonde hair and blue eyes and stuff like that. Explorers would constantly report this. And none of these tribes were ever found. But the idea that you're here in a hostile country and you would find something so outlandish like that seems to have stuck in people's minds. This stuck so much that literally nearly 1,000 years later, from Saint Bernard to Christopher Columbus, the idea is still there. That's how much currency these rumors have. And you know what? It was enough to convince people to set sail. You can look into it. Like I said, the Viking exploration is well known. Prince Matic is pretty well known, and I'd say it's definitely plausible. But what is this island that people kept reporting? I think it might have been the Sargasso Sea. It's fully possible that the kelp in the waters around the Sargasso Sea could have had enough kelp in some of the nicer years that it did come together to form an island. The weather down there is known to be a little bit tricky, to say the least. And it would be a place that you could stay for a year, have decent food supplies, and still make it home. Fresh water, not 100% sure about it, but I don't really know a lot about medieval survival methods. You could theoretically distill some water, but I don't know what the technology would be like in 500. They knew how to boil things, but whether they had enough ability to recapture it, that's a little on the shaky side. There's also some plants and some animals and some fish that you can eat that you can get water out of. It's a little tricky, but it is possible. So, what we're left over with is this mysterious island reported by multiple people, and reported that they actually saw it. Not just that it existed, but they physically saw it, they physically went to it, they physically stood on it. And it's often regarded to be a floating island, which is an idea that reoccurs in comic books and stuff like that. This idea that an island could float away. What would be more likely, like I said before, is that a volcano could temporarily elevate a small area of the ocean's surface, and that would explain the tumultuous waters in the storms. Or the Sargasso Sea. Would have been tragic for those people who decided to settle there when the island went away, which would be why that we never heard back from them. But it would mean they were right. There was an island there. Unfortunately, because of GPS and computer surveillance, we have lost a little bit of that mystery. We'll never know what happened in the past because without direct evidence, we can't prove anything. But what we do know is something was big enough to inspire people to put their entire fate in the hands of those little carracks and caravels and the various ships that people sailed with in those days. That's some pretty strong faith. And I don't just mean in God, but faith in your information that something lies out there. But it's not unreasonable. Like I said, the Vikings did it. There's a whole lot of other people that supposedly did it, and the Pacific Ocean was settled just by that same spirit. But just for a moment, think back on how terrifying that must have been, to set your sails off into the literal unknown with no intention of ever coming back. Wow. Just sends shivers down my spine. Don't know about you, but that's phenomenally brave. Anyway, just something to think about. Disappearing islands. Yes, the technology was not as advanced back then, and rumors did start. But on the other hand, people were finding things. So perhaps they knew something we don't. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And we hope you all have a fantastic day.